Good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to a review of Following the Buddha's Footsteps While Venerable is Gone. Let's do our prayers first, and then we'll have some silence, my little short motivation, and then we'll start. Now, once again, we want to make sure that we don't have an empty space in front of us. So bring the Buddha to mind. That beautiful body of light. Incredible omniscient mind that knows all objects of knowledge. That limitless compassion that never leaves any of us. And his entire reason for existence to benefit sentient beings without exception. So connect with your refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, which he represents.
I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings not be separated from sorrowless bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. Tayata ho mune mune maha mune soha. Tayata ho mune mune maha mune soha. Tayata ho mune mune maha mune soha. Tayata ho mune mune maha mune soha.
So for the motivation tonight, when each of us looks at the Dharma and sees its impact on our lives, it might be fair to say that the Dharma is all about relationship. With it, we can't help but address, how we relate to ourselves. Do we really know who we are? What we think? What's important to us in life? And we begin to see how much the Dharma gives us the tools to learn and get familiar with this internal world of ours. To know how best to take care of these minds and become, as Venerable says many, many times over the years, our own best friends. That the Dharma compels us to, if we take it to heart, the Dharma can do amazing things with our minds. It compels us to learn to decide, first of all, whether we want to experience suffering or happiness, short-term or long-term. What are the causes for both? How to avoid one and nourish the other. To have clarity or live in confusion. To live with integrity or on that slippery slope on matters of ethics. So as we befriend ourselves with a growing mind of wisdom and compassion, that will reframe our relationships also with others. And we'll begin to see the world filled with kind living beings who have helped us since forever, and how so many of us don't have any idea of who they are, and are in fact, much like us, their own worst enemy. So the Three Jewels guides us to care for them, repaying that kindness and cultivating a wish to benefit them. And the greatest contribution that we can bring to those relationships is bodhicitta. So tonight, let's listen to these, the review about the potential that we have to truly benefit them by fulfilling this vast bodhicitta aspiration, and to, with a curious, open mind, to see what lies ahead in that journey of the kind of skill and wisdom and compassion that we will be able to attain if we stay true to our hearts and truly befriend ourselves and befriend all sentient beings for their greatest benefit. Let's do that tonight. So tonight we're going to skedaddle over to chapter 2. There's a lot in these chapters, folks. There really is. And we, can't go into the level of detail for the time that we have, so we're trying to just go to the highlights, covering some of them, not in a lot of detail, but, as best as we can. There's a lot of material for the next 3 weeks that we simply can't cover. So tonight we're going to continue with the Buddha Jewel. We're going to go to chapter 2, and we're going to talk about the 4 fearlessnesses, or the 4 self-confidences, and the 10 powers of the Buddha. So there are 2 things I want to share before we get going on this chapter. And this is what usually happens when you get to do these reviews. You start looking at things more deeply in your own mind. And the teachings bring up the weaving, the threads of the Dharma in your life, and how they just come to life when you get to do these reviews. So one thought that has come up as I prepared for this review was a statement that Venerable Chodron, she made this statement a lot more in the early years. I haven't heard it too frequently in the recent years, but it has added a lot of significance right now as I got ready for this review. And one of the things that this thing that she said is that since we didn't have the karma to meet the Buddha in person and to receive teachings from him, and I think it was while she was doing how to rely on a spiritual mentor, somewhere along the line there, she said it is helpful to remember that if a Buddha were to be teaching today, he would be teaching exactly what our teachers are teaching. There's no different course that he took that they're teaching us that is anywhere different than what they are teaching us. That is correct, that is accurate, and that is coming from their own experience, and that we have the karma to have met very qualified Mahayana spiritual teachers who teach us the true Dharma that they have lived, they've practiced, and that they embody in their own minds. And that they do it in really, really unique ways. So we think about our teachers and we think how about, sharing the Dharma and doing it, their dispositions are different, the way that they approach it, the way they tell stories, the way they tie things together. I've just found that just coming up very, very clearly as I'm going through this review. And one of the reasons that it came up is that one of the things that I cherish about and appreciate about Venerable Chodron's particular style of teaching is her relatability, how she shares a lot of the Dharma by bringing into the teachings these things that happen in the world. Whatever crosses her desk, whether it's something in the news, something in events, an email or an article. And what happened here on the first, she took her 3 Fridays to go through these powers and this fearlessnesses. And one of the reasons is the first night she spent 45 minutes talking about this book that she was reading. And the brilliance of it was she talked about the book, she brought it through a Dharma lens, then she segued into the motivation, and then she went into the teachings, tying all this thing about fearlessness and what is the cause and what actually is fear. So I wanted to share this because she took a good chunk of time on this book and then she wove it into the teachings. So I wanted to start with that because it made, once again, a big impression when I went back again. So she got this book, I'm not sure where she got it from, but it was called The Coddling of the American Mind. Do you remember this little teaching she gave? It was back in July. And it was written by a social psychologist and somebody who apparently is an expert on that first amendment, the freedom of speech. And I just want to give you a little bit she gave some of the background, but there's a little bit more interesting stuff. And it really shows the power of our minds and what we put into it and how it influences our behavior and how we respond to the world. So since the 2016 elections, these 2 authors have witnessed on the college campuses these increasing protests against controversial or dangerous speakers setting in motion this really what they perceive to be a very dangerous and false belief that's been taking root in the minds of very, very young people that are in our education system, and it's now kind of bleeding out into the country. Convincing these young people that they are inherently fragile and must be protected from these allegedly harmful impacts of speech with which they disagree. And the authors are saying this is just so not right. It threatens democracy. It threatens academic freedom, that rigorous debate that colleges have been known for so long, that you get in there, you debate, you passionately disagree, you align, you challenge the status quo. But what's happening here is that there's these 3 great untruths that seem to be percolating under the surface on the campuses right now that have become prominent in the whole education system. The first one is, what doesn't kill you makes you weaker, which is totally the antithesis of what we learned, which is what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So seeing that this whole need for resiliency and that the challenges of life are to strengthen the human spirit. And now they're believing that it only cripples people. Okay, this is the first untruth. The second one is your feelings, always trust your feelings. Well, if they're not under the control of afflictions of polluted karma, that's probably a fairly accurate statement. But they're going totally into their feelings, and the logic and the reasoning and the investigative process seems to be getting pulled out of their experience. And then the last one is that life is a battle between good people and evil people. So we've now become inherently evil from our own side just by the words that we speak or the ideas that we have. And that these three great truths contradict modern psychology, they contradict a lot of the ancient wisdom for so many of the cultures that we have in our world. So they've been tracking this stuff for this book came out in 2019. There is actually an ideology term now for this. It's called safetyism. It's based on the belief that it's harmful to experience uncomfortable emotions. Compared to prior generations, one of the main differences is the belief that the world should not be organized according to what is right or wrong, ethical or not ethical, but what is safe or unsafe, emotionally and mentally. So this is where Venerable responds. And she says, gosh, to be so sensitive and feel offended at the slightest thing, that people, she's perceiving that people are starting to become very emotionally, mentally fragile. They're jumping to one side of the issue. Of course, the Gaza war was the huge sort of, the lid of the pot came off this summer on the campuses when this happened, where people were taking sides. And once they took sides, the person who disagreed with you became inappropriate, unsafe, emotionally, you were disturbed and unsettled by them. There was something wrong with them, and that you had to cast them out of the whole structure of your education system. That feeling safe usually referred that when, you were physically endangered. But nowadays, it's much more for this particular internet generation that it means emotionally or mentally unsettled. If you're challenged by a different viewpoint. So it's not even anything but a different way of thinking. And that there are actually safe rooms in the college campuses now where people who understand you will be there for you to process this. So challenging. So Venerable she says, what are we going to do about this if we can't even talk to each other without offending each other? How can we live, especially in America, where we're just so culturally, economically, racially, educationally diverse? How are we going to be able to live together if we can't talk together? And this is really what's kind of underneath a big piece, not just in the college campuses. So then she goes and starts putting the more Dharma perspective into this by saying, where in the world, or where in samsara can you go where someone isn't going to disagree with you? Someone isn't going to criticize you. Someone isn't going to like you. She invites us to investigate our own sensitivity, where we react to small things like over the top, even the slightest criticism or slight. So she really is turning the question back on us as a group. She brings up that whole experience that she had when she was in 7th grade when the little boy in her class said, go back where you belong. And she said, I wasn't sure whether he meant Chicago or Auschwitz or Lithuania or something, but she ran into the girls' bathroom and cried all day. And she said that was one of the most important life experiences that she had, because she decided that she did not want to go through life with an identification of persecution. And of course, we know her personally now that this has been, she doesn't let anything hold her back. Whatever people want to identify her as a Buddhist nun or a woman or whatever, she just doesn't get held by people trying to label her. And we have seen that over and over again. That it has informed her life in a lot of ways. And that she said, let's give people a benefit of a doubt. Let's start trusting. Let's be kind. And if something comes up, we talk it out. And then she says it's so helpful to build up our Dharma practice. One of the crucial things about our Dharma practice is when things happen that we don't like, or somebody doesn't like us, do we really want to fall apart? And she said, and when we go to Dharma teachings, how many of the times do you go to Dharma teachings and you don't like a lot of the things you're hearing, especially when you start getting into the self-centered thought, the self-grasping, our problems with attachment and anger, and they just keep pressing on the self-centered thought, keep crushing blows to the ego. And we sit in our seats and we squirm. But does that mean that we don't listen to the Dharma? This is like the sword coming out, and this is exactly what we need. So when and she said, and if you don't get some sort of pushback when you hear the teachings on the self-centered thought and its disadvantages, if you don't get triggered, if you don't get a little reactive, you're not listening. And I think almost everybody in this room, at least I know, has had that kind of experience where you want to walk out of the room because it sounds like the teachings are talking to you directly. Because she said that the purpose in Dharma life is to get rid of this demon of self-centered thought that harbors all this insecurity, this fear, self-doubt, suspicion, and to grow some resilience and strength, because living in samsara. We're going to find a lot of things coming at us that we don't like. This is samsara. So that was her take on that event. And then she segued into the motivation, and she said, we really have to think about what danger really is. What is really fear? From a Buddhist perspective, danger means cycling in samsara, taking one rebirth after another, fueled by our afflictions and karma. That's what we have to be afraid of, this wisdom fear. We are taught to be afraid and be aware of the dangers of samsara. Taking refuge is one of the causes for refuge. To seek spiritual guidance so we can extricate ourselves from this cycle that we've been doing since beginningless time. And to think of its dangers, to really get real about what samsara is offering. It is a frightful place when we think about it. And to think of the Buddha and his qualities, which is where she's starting to segue into that, his compassion, how he works so hard as an ordinary being to purify his mind, to create merit, to study, to practice the teachings, progress along the path. And what he did this all because of this great compassion for us and everybody else. And he wanted to attain awakening, not just to fulfill his own aims, but to fulfill this great aim of being of benefit. And to wrap our minds around that, to understand what to be really afraid of, to grow this wisdom fear. And that there is this feeling of protection that we can really touch into because we have found this reliable refuge. You know, there's a lot of things in the world that are dangerous, that can harm us physically, mentally, words, criticism, all sorts of things that can come at us. But we're the ones who get to call it dangerous in terms of whether it's mentally impacting us, emotionally impacting us. It's only if we decide, she says, here's where the agency comes. We get to decide, are we offended? Do we have a choice to be offended or not offended? We have a choice to welcome diversity of ideas or to be reactive and close off on them. I don't want to hear any more nutty ideas. Thank you very much. I just want to hear this echo chamber, everything that I agree with. It's up to us to see the world not as inherently dangerous from this perspective. And then she says to ask ourselves and check how we interpret different things, different words, different events, and to see exactly, well, where is the offense actually? Where is the untruth actually? Where is the disagreement actually? And to see a lot of the times our mind is creating these painful situations. So now she's getting deeper, deeper into the Dharma, right? She's talking about mind as a source of happiness and pain. And she says, you know, if we were accurately perceiving these situations, being offended and angry, and those situations were objective and existed in the way that they appeared, then there would be no way not to be afraid. You'd be offended, you would be criticized, and if everything existed as our ignorant mind perceived it, there wouldn't be any hope. But if ignorance is incorrect, which it is, then we have a chance to see situations, the possibilities that change is there. This is something that we're always coming up against, to be able to question our imputations, our labeling, our ideas, our opinions, our emotions, what we think about things, and to adjust them to be more realistic and beneficial. So all of this whole event around this college thing comes down to this is our practice. And all other sentient beings have the same problem, believing things exist as they appear, and they suffer just like us because they've got that view. We all experience the same misery by holding on to inherent existence, the self-centered thought fueling that self-grasping, fueling that misconception. But lucky for us, we have a reliable refuge, so let's go along that path and see what we can contribute to the world. Really look at the way we think, look at the way that we perceive things, how we interpret things. Sharing the Dharma perspective and to realize the nature of reality in order to do that. So she kind of ties this all together with our responsibility for our own minds, which goes back to my motivation about this, all about relationship. All about relationship. Okay, so for the first part here, we've got on page 39, we've got in this chapter, we will discuss the excellent qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the attributes possessed only by trustworthy and fully qualified objects of refuge. So there's lots of them. There's the 10 powers, the 8 unique qualities, the 4 kinds of fearlessness, the qualities of the body, speech, and mind. So here I wanted to kind of maybe describe my process on how I came to meet the 10 powers and how I related to them in the beginning and how I relate to them now. Because I don't know about you, but it was a fascinating thing the first time I ever met the teachings on the 10 powers. I think they were in a book that Venerable Thubten, even before she was ordained in Seattle, gave me this orange Kopan Lamrim outline by Venerable Karen that had them lined out there. I was just taken by them completely. And over the years, I came to realize that because of my Judeo-Christian conditioning, I had to work through a little bit of magical thinking. It's hard not to have it. I mean, here are these qualities and powers of the Buddha that are just beyond almost comprehension, because he has purified every defilement, every stain, every latency. He's cultivated and perfected every good quality, that the mind is totally released from any kind of obscurations and obstacles. So it seems to make total sense that he should be able to touch into just about any object of knowledge, including our karma, our actions, our previous, present, what might happen if we continue the way we're behaving. But my magical thinking kept throwing in this savior thinking. Maybe I don't have to work so hard. He's going to take care of my karma. He sees everything that I'm doing. I just have to ask forgiveness. Just a few prayers, a few prostrations, some mantras. He's going to take care of it. I mean, I had this kind of strange savior, Jesus, because I didn't know what else to do with it, because it was so beyond my ordinary comprehension. I hadn't really understood the qualities of the Buddha's mind and what the cause and conditions are to bring it about. So it was going right into magic zone. And so, a few years ago, I kind of made peace with this savior thinking and released the Buddha from any responsibility on having to be the Santa Claus in my life or the baby Jesus in my life. And then every once in a while, I kind of go to not exactly the other extreme, but I get a little bit of skepticism in there. I get a little bit of cynicism, a little bit down, saying, I don't know. I'm getting my mind, rebirth is pretty much in my purview, because I can't imagine getting here if I hadn't had another life, because I certainly didn't create the causes to be here, this life. But it got a little bit into doubt, like he emanates to help. He turns himself into mailboxes and dogs and pets and people, and does he really do, all this kind of funny adolescent kind of thinking, questioning about, well, what is he really doing in his spare time with his omniscient mind while I'm, struggling in samsara? So you get into this funny little self-doubt on the other side, which doesn't help either. The Buddha is exactly who he is, and he's worked really, really hard to have the capacity. And because he loves and cares for us with this compassion that knows he's as bound to us as we're bound to samsara with his compassion, that he's doing everything, everything that he can. So I want to share with you, before we get into the fearlessnesses and the powers, things that Geshe Zopa, one of the most straight shooters, talkers on putting things down, clear as a bell, at least for this mind, on how to look at these incredible abilities that the Buddha has. And once again, what is our relationship to the Buddha in regards to them? So he does this last year when we did Refuge. I spent a lot of time in this book looking at Geshe Zopa's commentary on the good qualities, the knowledge, the compassion, the power of the Buddha's mind. So I want to just share, because these are really, this answers a lot of the doubts and puts to rest a lot of the magical thinking, at least it did for me. Okay. The Buddha's actions of body, speech, and mind are spontaneous and unceasing. The Buddha knows what should be done and does exactly that. Because he has perfect compassion, he acts without any selfish regard for his own interests. The Buddha does not help others sometimes and at other times stop to do something else. He acts to benefit other beings all the time and will continue to do so until the end of samsara. Even though all the Buddha's physical, verbal, and mental actions are continually helpful, they will not be effective unless the student has the potential to benefit from them. Worthy disciples receive the benefit of the Buddha's actions just as millions of clear bodies of water reflect the moon's light. However, just as the moon will not be reflected in muddy water, those who are not prepared will not be able to receive any benefits from the Buddha's actions. There is nothing that the Buddha does not do to help us. You cannot come up with anything about which you can say, oh, the Buddha didn't do that. However, here we go, the success of his actions depend upon conditions from the side of the disciple. Sometimes Buddhas have appeared in the world and taught all the practices for attaining liberation, but the beings at that time and place did not benefit. In a sense, you could say, wrap your mind around this, that the power of an individual's karma is almost equal to the power of the Buddha's actions. Many people today lack the powerful karma necessary to receive the benefit that the Buddhas offer. Even though the complete teachings are available, some people do not connect with them, and others intentionally stay away. These people are like cups that have been turned upside down. A downturned cup will get nothing when someone is pouring delicious drink. If something like that happens to you, it is not the Buddha's fault. It's your fault. And then he proceeds to talk about those different analogies that the Buddha cannot wash away the negativities like water, take the thorn out of the foot like afflictions, or insert any of his realizations into our minds. And to end with, the only way that a Buddha can bestow total cessation of suffering is to teach individuals the method to accomplish it themselves. So it's a lot like taking the medicine. The doctor has given us the medicine, and now we've got to take it. No matter how many Buddhas come into the world, this is the only way they can protect and save sentient beings. So it's all about relationship to the Buddha, and that his enlightening activity and his ability to do this comes with our own practice. And I don't know about you, but as years go on, and the purification sometimes the mind is a little bit more settled, a little bit more clear. And I go into the world and I have these experiences that are like, who was that? I mean, there's some kind of connection. There's some kind of heartfelt exchange there. And I love the idea, without getting into magical thinking, that the Buddha, understanding the karma of each one of us, will go through those powers, is that there must be times in our practice where our minds and our receptivity is so open that there might be a little sliver to where they can connect with us in some form or another. Or we simply start having more insights, we start having more understandings. The 45th time you hear precious human life, it lands in a way that it hadn't before. That comes with a lot of study, but that comes with the connection that we're making to the Buddha's enlightening influence of having the mind that he has and the way that he was able to teach the way that he did. So it's so helpful to just wrap our minds as we start looking at these powers, is that it's not magical thinking. and to try to allay any type of misgivings or skepticism is just to open up the mind on what this relationship is like, to be able to connect with the Buddha and on all the compassion that he delivers moment by moment to try to help us in whatever way he can. He can't drive a vehicle, but he's in the passenger seat with the GPS and he's got the whole thing marked out here. And it's just a matter of letting him, direct us and drive where he's asking us to drive. Yes, Venerable Gunga.
A guest came here maybe a couple years ago, and she was practicing in some other faith tradition. I forget what it was, but she said, she came to the conclusion one day, she really wanted to be in a community of spiritual practitioners. And so she just kept thinking about it and thinking, oh, I really want to do this. And then she said she went out somewhere, and then she came back to her house and her desk, and on her computer screen was Sravasti Abbey and in her browser, and she had never heard of the Abbey before, and she couldn't figure out how that got onto her computer, and so that's how she came here.
It's a lovely thought. And who knows, you want to be skeptical, or you want to just say, well, that sure is fun. I like the idea. She came, she benefited. More, give me more. We don't know how the Buddha works. There's some place along the path, maybe the path of seeing, maybe where we can actually have some super knowledges that we can start seeing a little bit of this. I'm sure some of our dear, dear precious teachers have got experiences like this, but I think it's a little bit farther down the road where we actually can make some contact. But I'm looking forward to the day. All right, so the 4 self-confidences or 4 fearlessnesses are explained both in the Sanskrit and the Pali traditions. I always really like that idea that the Pali and the Sanskrit they usually go quite parallel, quite nicely. It's in the Lion's Roar, which is in the Madhyama Nikaya, chapter 12, the Greater Discourse on the Lion's Roar, and then it's in the Sublime Continuum, the Sanskrit tradition. And Venerable reminds us that she says we have to always remember that we're taking refuge in the 3 jewels. We're not taking refuge in a tradition, or we're not taking, refuge in an institution. We're taking refuge in the 3 jewels. And for me personally, to remind all of us that as we do retreat with Chenrezig and Vajrasattva, to remember that all the qualities that we're going to go over tonight, the 4 fearlessnesses and the 10 powers, Chenrezig and Vajrasattva also have these qualities. It is not exclusive to Shakyamuni Buddha, that it is the omniscient mind of an awakened one attained by all the Buddhas, regardless of what particular quality they tend to manifest for our benefit. They all have the 10 powers. They all have the 8 excellent qualities of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha in their minds. So just to remember that, to keep the mind really open tonight as we go through these. Okay, so the 4 self-confidences possessing which he claims the herd leader's place, roars his lion's roar in the assemblies and sets rolling the wheel of Brahma. What are those 4? All right, so the first one is, I'm just quoting the different ones, and then Venerable does, sometimes she doesn't give much commentary because it's fairly self-evident that the Buddha's refuting some unfounded accusation. And then there are some that she has a little bit more that she wants to say about it, and I've got a few things to say about them as well. So the first fearlessness is, here I see no ground on which any renunciate, Brahman, God, Mara, Brahma, or anyone else at all in the world could, in accordance with the Dharma, accuse me thus. While you claim full awakening, you're not fully awakened in regard to certain things. Seeing no ground for that, I abide in safety, fearlessness, and self-confidence. That's pretty much straightforward. Someone's accusing the Buddha of not being as awakened as he says he is, and it doesn't shake his self-confidence, it doesn't shake his understandings of the truth. He's not worried about his reputation. He's just, this is not true. I abide in safety, fearlessness, and self-confidence. Now, one of the things that Venerable does extrapolate here is that on page 40, there's a paragraph there that says, that explains this particular fearlessness, that says, no one can justifiably say that the Buddha knows some things, but not everything. With full confidence, the Buddha is able to state that he has complete and perfect knowledge of all phenomena. This quality is attained through being generous in teaching the Dharma, this perfect knowledge of a phenomena. And she wanted to be clear to say that, first of all, what it would be like to be able to speak and not have any doubt, to not have any worry, am I truthful enough, worrying about what people think, is it going to land okay, is it helpful, is it timely, is it truthful, is it kind? He never has to worry about those things. Is he going to worry about being offended? No. Are we? Maybe. But what she wanted to clarify, this one little sentence says that to attain the full, complete and perfect knowledge of all phenomena is attained through being generous in teaching the Dharma. She wanted to be clear to say that that is not the only cause and condition to have full knowledge of all phenomena. That she says is that quality is due to a specific action, but that's not the only action that brings the result of that quality. Because it sounds like this is the only thing that the Buddha ever did is teach the Dharma, and he attained all this incredible omniscient mind. Well, that's not. It's basically, she says, it kind of gives you a link. This action brings results, but that there is more to that than the one action. So she wanted to clarify that one statement. Number 2, I see no ground on which a renunciate, Brahma, etc., or anyone at all could accuse me thus. While you claim to have destroyed the pollutants, these pollutants are not destroyed by you. Seeing no ground for that, I abide in safety, fearlessness, and self-confidence. Okay, so now they're accusing him that he hasn't destroyed all the defilements or the pollutants. Once again, the Buddha knows what he has accomplished. This is totally unfounded, this accusation. By means of his perfect realization of reality, he has cleansed his mind of all gross and subtle pollutants, as well as their potencies, enabling his mind to accurately reflect all that exists. This quality ensures that the Buddha's motivation for speaking, acting, and teaching is free from greed, competition, conceit, and jealousy. This quality is attained through having abandoned conceit and arrogance, which are, on the path where you're eliminating a lot of these afflictive, afflictive obscurations and afflictions. Conceit is one of those. Is one of the last ones to go. I mean, it's one of the more tenacious, insidious ones. So once again, and through all of these teachings, Venerable keeps going back and asking us, what would it be like to have a mind that is purified of all pollutants, that we never have to question any of our motivations? And any time that we share our knowledge, can we say that we are free from pride? Can we say that we're free from conceit, competition, comparing, jealousy, or any of the 8 worldly concerns? Anything, whether it's how to fold your robes, or how to cook a meal, or how to do anything here at the Abbey, or anything out there. Can we do that just knowing we have this skill due to the kindness of somebody who taught us, that it doesn't even come from our side, it's through the kindness of other people, and not be swayed by praise and reputation and fame? So this is a huge question of which I know the answer to. I'm always running under the temptation of pride, arrogance, conceit, being full of myself when I think I know something more than somebody else. The Buddha does not have this kind of mind. This pollutant does not get in the way of him being able to benefit people. And as we grow in our understanding of the Dharma, we'll be clear and clear when we share what we know, that we won't be swayed so much by the 8 worldly concerns. This is our hope, and this is a constant practice, even here in community. Okay, number 3. I see no ground on which a renunciate, Brahmin, Mar, or anyone at all could accuse me thus. Those things you called obstructions are not able to obstruct one who engages in them. Seeing no ground for that, I abide in safety, fearlessness, and self-confidence. So this is somebody who's accusing the Buddha that, there are things that simply aren't obstructions to the path. You say they are, but they're not. No one with good reason can say that the Buddha states something that is an obstruction that is not an obstruction. And this actually has a story to it, which is a very interesting story. It's chapter 22 in the Majjhima Nikaya. It's called the simile of the snake. And what happens here is that there is a bhikshu, his name's Arita, who believes that the activities the Buddha says that are obstructions, hedonistically indulging in sensual pleasures, does not obstruct someone who engages in them. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with sense pleasures, sensual delights. It makes you happy. Go ahead and do it. There's nothing wrong with it. It will not obstruct your path to liberation. So the monks find out about this, and they go to the Buddha. Well, first of all, they go to him. According to the story, he was a vulture killer. I'm not sure what that is. But he refused to budge when they admonished him and said, what you're saying is not true. You're getting people into trouble by telling them, go and drink, go and have sexual misconduct, go and enjoy sense pleasures. It's not going to get in the way of your liberation. This is wrong view here, fella, but he refused to budge. So they got him to the Buddha, who once again repeatedly explained sensual desire is an obstruction, and it can be verified by observing one's own experience. I mean, that's another piece of it too, that he also wanted to say to Rita, said, is it true that when you enjoy sensual desires that your mind is totally focused on the path of liberation and purification? I don't think so. So he directed people to indulge in this. He didn't know his own mind. He apparently didn't understand the precepts, and he didn't understand the teachings because he was developing this wrong view by suggesting this sensual desire. And we have a precept, right? The sensual desire is an obstacle to the path. So the Buddha says you can see, and Venerable says you can see that by following this wrong view, he's really going to experience some suffering. He refuses to budge in his wrong views, even after the Buddha reminds him that sensual desire provides little gratification. You're going to experience a lot of suffering and much despair, and it is a great danger. Now, according to the story, he was quite shamefaced and quite humble, but I don't know whether he straightened up his ways or they banished him from teaching. It doesn't say, but he looked a little bit like he had been admonished, a little bit shamefaced, but it didn't say what happened there, whether he changed his mind and changed his view. So it comes up with the simile of the snake, in that not grasping the correct meaning of the teachings and grasping instead this wrong view without wisdom will bring him harm and suffering for a long time, just as a man is looking for a snake. He's trying to find a snake. He's hunting a snake. He finds a snake and he picks it up by the tail, thereby getting bitten, causing terrible injury, even death. So similar to someone not learning the correct meaning nor gaining wisdom, but instead developing a wrong view, is pretty much like getting bit by a snake because you held it by the tail. Whereas those who hear the Dharma, study it, learn its correct meaning, and gain wisdom by this, which will produce happiness and well-being, similar to someone needing to find a snake, hunting a snake, finds one, grasps it with a cleft stick, one of those sticks that's got a prong on it, and once grasped, holds it by the neck, that even if it wraps around the arm, no injury or death will come to that person because they rightly grasp the snake. So similarly, correct view, there will be no suffering in the future because you're holding the teachings correctly. And the Buddha ends this sutta by saying, if you don't understand the Dharma, ask me, or ask one of the elder bhikshus or monastics. Don't go around with wrong view, creating the karma to have some horrible rebirth. So that's the story behind the one about all obstructions have been removed. That's what the Buddha says. There's nothing, they will get in the way. And so one of the things that Venerable went from there on this fearlessness, she said, that inner world you could call things, she said, you say certain things you call obstruction, but other people don't think it's a problem. So then for some reason, she said, killing creates a lot of negative karma and will become a serious obstruction to not only happiness but liberation. But she says, there are folks that say there's nothing wrong with killing if you have to defend yourself, your family, your religion, In fact, the Buddha or the God will probably be on your side. So there is this thinking. And it just so happens that something happened last week that just fits into this perfectly. A young man, 26 years old, who was a star student, engineer, who had some serious physical problems and had a lot of surgeries, health issues, ended up killing the CEO of United Healthcare in the back, shot him in the back in New York. The healthcare system has been under investigation because they seem to refuse a larger quantity of claims with people who have life-threatening illnesses that have needed insurance. And they were under investigation. They seem to have a lot more of them than most healthcare systems. So this young man considered this man a parasite, that people were dying because of his healthcare system. He's the CEO. Got along well with his employees, seemed to be well liked. But this young man went from being a normal, high-achieving little computer wizard in engineering to shooting this man in the back, saying that he'd killed a parasite and that some of the bullet casings had some kind of defy, defend, or some kind of statement. And the country is going through this bizarre dividing on whether this is a good thing or not. That they think that he did millions of suffering people a favor. There's this whole thing in the news, that the tweets and everybody just saying, gosh, he deserved it. Other people are just horrified. If this is where America's going, we've got a problem, that someone takes this on themselves to take the life of somebody. Seeing killing is totally justified. So here's one of those things where, the obstruction is in there and they think they're doing fine when in fact this is creating the causes for incredible suffering. Leaving behind a family with 2 small children. This man was just going to a meeting. Anyway, so that's one of the things that the Buddha has refuted, that there are obstructions to liberation, and wrong view is a main part of it. Number 4, I see no ground on which any renunciate, etc., anyone at all could accuse me thus. When you teach the Dhamma to someone, it does not lead him where he practices it to complete destruction of dukkha. Seeing no ground in that, I abide in safety, fearlessness, and self-confidence. All right, so there's somebody during the Buddha's time that said what you're teaching does not lead a practitioner to liberation. The Buddha says there's no ground for this. He fearlessly says these accusations are simply not true. Many of the Buddha's disciples during his life and afterwards who followed the path that he taught attained the results, liberation, and awakening. He talked to so many people. He talked to the Brahmas, he talked to the merchants, he talked to the non-Buddhists. Many times changing the non-Buddhist wrong view to the correct view by the skill of his presentation of the correct view. And he was so fearless about the accuracy of his teachings so that he didn't need to defend himself. And so that's one of the beauties about, and the fact that there were results in his very life that people have attained from then on out, the realizations of the path, arhatship, Buddhahood, bodhisattvas. There's just over and over, there is evidence that this accusation is totally unfounded. So those are being fearless in these 4 ways. The Tathagata teaches the Dharma with perfect intrepidity and self-confidence, free from all self-doubt. Venerable made a comment here about I'll pass on that, yeah. Something about how followers of authoritarians become so power hungry, but we'll pass on that. So the ornament of clear realizations explains these 4 proclamations. 2 are related. The first 2 are related to one's own welfare, in case the Buddha's welfare. We see this a lot in the different qualities of the Buddha. He attains them first to fulfill his own aims, and then second to fulfill the aims of others. And the 3rd and 4th are to attain others' welfare. Starting with complete self-confidence is related to fulfilling his own welfare because these are the results that the Buddha himself experienced. his fearless proclamation that he correctly identifies obstructions on the path, and that the Dharma he teaches definitely leads to nirvana when practiced correctly are qualities by which the Buddha benefits others and are thus known for fulfilling others' welfare. It's so important when we hear these different types of lists of his qualities and stuff to realize that there's these bodhicitta. You got the two aims right there. All right, folks, now we're going on to the 10 powers. Are exceptional knowledges unique to the Buddha that enabled him to perform the special functions of a Buddha, such as to roar his lion's roar of full awakening and to establish the Buddha's teachings in the world, teach sentient beings skillfully, and lead. These 10 are pristine wisdoms that have abandoned all obscurations and know the infinite knowable objects. And this is found in the Pali tradition and the Sanskrit tradition, both of these again. So here, Venerable, just to start off with that paragraph, she just wants to clarify that all of these wisdoms are the same in that they have eliminated all obscurations, that this mind is the mind of an omniscient being. Because then she says, people might ask, well, why is there a list of 10 different things, if in fact that's true? She says there isn't one wisdom for the first power, there isn't a second wisdom for the second power. She says that they're all pointing out specific virtues that the Buddha has, but it is the same pristine wisdom. And she says it indicates that we ourselves have the potential to be like the Buddha because our minds, like his, are empty of inherent existence. So this is, once again, this is the Dharmakaya potential within our own minds. It functions even though it's empty. It can transform into a mind that has these very same qualities and powers. So once again, she keeps encouraging us, the more we hear about them, the more we become familiar with them, the more we imagine what it would be like to have them, which she does over and over again as she really unpacks these 10 powers. What would it be like? What would it be like? Can you imagine, just imagine, trying to get us to be more familiar rather than being skeptical about them, to get inspired by the possibility, all right? Because of the empty nature of our own minds, that's the possibility. All right, so number 1, the Tathagata understands as it actually is the possible as possible and the impossible as impossible. First question she asks, do you think awakening is possible or impossible? Maybe for others, but not for me. And to be clear that happiness is possible, it is a result from virtue, but happiness is not possible as a result of non-virtue. Misery is a product of non-virtue, it is not a product of virtue. So these are the simple possibilities and impossibilities. Page 41, the Buddha knows with direct, unmistaken perception the appropriate and inappropriate relations between actions and their results. Okay, so she basically says this, what is being said here. He knows that happiness arises only from constructive actions, never from destructive ones. And the harmful actions lead to dukkha, never happiness. This quality is a result of the Buddha's having generated bodhicitta and purely kept the bodhisattva ethical code in his previous lives. All right, so that's something to hang our hat on. So keeping good ethical conduct, so Venerable gets into understanding karma and its results, to understand what to abandon, what to cultivate, and to remember over and over again that he did not invent karma. He saw the causes and their concordant results, and that's how he named it, but he did not invent karma. He simply saw people suffering, looked back and saw that they had created some destructive karma, and this was the result, and vice versa. So we got to get over this. He made this up. And then she uses this interesting comparison, I guess, with Mao Zedong. During the Cultural Revolution, there are some books we have in the library that talk about this, and she had read the history of the Cultural Revolution, and there was nobody allowed to voice any ideas. And that the little red book that was part of Mao's ideology had to be memorized, and that you were put in these sessions where you had to be tested to convince the authorities that you believed them. And if you didn't, you were imprisoned, you were tortured, you were killed. It was like the whole collective of that country. 42 million died of starvation during the Cultural Revolution. You couldn't say what you knew to be true, because if it wasn't politically correct, it wasn't in the little red book, and your life was endangered. So it was almost, she said, it was almost unbelievable from what the history books and what the history really shows, is that the entire collective society, she said, basically went crazy. And they turned on their families, they turned on their teachers, they turned on their children, they turned on their neighbors. When they knew what was true was seen as untrue, and what was untrue was seen as true. I mean, there was torture, genocide, starvation, but they couldn't speak the truth. They had to say everything was fine. You know, community, collective, all for one and all one for all, whatever Mao's, slogans were. But they were seeing something, but they couldn't say it. What was impossible, they couldn't say what was happening. So the other way in which things are possible or impossible is that if you have the right view really deeply in your heart, to see the four distortions is very difficult to do. But if you have a wrong view, which most of us do because we're still under the control of self-grasping ignorance, we see the four distortions as true. It's impossible for an Arya to relinquish their refuge in the Buddha and follow a non-Buddhist teacher once they've realized the nature of reality, because they see very clearly that the Buddhist teachings are indeed correct. So there's no way for them to get going off on some wrong view, some non-Buddhist path, some misconceptions about how things exist once they reach the path of seeing. All right, number 2, the Tathagata understands that as it actually is the results of actions undertaken past, future, and present, with possibilities and with causes. So this is where, he knew not just the general results of karma, but also the specific ones for each and every person. What action they created led to what kind of results. He could tell all the prayers, the aspirations, the karma that each one of us sitting in this room created to be here. Venerable she said this twice in the teaching. How do we get here? What is the karma to be in this space right now? We don't fully understand the full results of karma. We can see the link between some causes and some results, but the Buddha can say things about karma with total confidence in knowing every subtlety, every cause, every result, from the coarse to the extremely subtle. So she says, then she asks the question again, what kind of cause brings us to be in this room, listening to this particular, tonight, a review? In our previous lives, did we encounter the Dharma? Did we have faith? And is that what brought us to the Abbey? There are so many causes and conditions. Even having the 4 requisites, having all the food, shelter, medicine that we have here, is a whole other limitless continuum of cause and conditions. We can never grasp all of them. And each one of us, it's not like all of us had to create the exact same causes. There's no anybody in here that got to this place in this moment coming from an exact track, exact lifetimes, exact virtue. She said that each one of us created a unique set of causes that have ripened for each of us to be here. All our karmic, what our predispositions are, whatever rebirths we have, whatever virtuous seeds, aspirations we made to bring us here are uniquely our own, but yet we came to the same result. Now, of course, what we're doing here right now, while I'm, giving the spiel, is, are you listening? Are you going somewhere? Are you looking at the news? I don't know, but anyway, and she says, what would it be like if we knew how we got here? Would that be terrifying? Would that be inspiring? It probably would be. The good things, I want to know about how I get the good things. I'm not quite sure I'm interested in knowing when suffering comes. But to know everything about our past, what we've done, or the karma we still have unripened, would that frighten us? Would that like, oh my gosh. The wheel of sharp weapons, she says, they are general reactions that bring general results. Only the Buddha knows the intricacies of even the wheel of sharp weapons. And the propelling karma ripens at the time of death, propels us into a specific rebirth. Completing karma is not the realm we're born in, but the circumstances that go along with that birth, the environment, the family, what we look like, whatever like that. Okay, number 3, the Tathagata understands as it actually is the way leading to all destinations. Okay, well, once again, to just imagine that the Buddha is absolutely tracking, the various rebirths that result in all the different propelling karmas that living beings are experiencing, and we're all dying. I mean, there's millions and trillions and limitless beings dying every moment, and he knows what they're experiencing at the time of death, what karma is ripening, where they're going to be propelled, what rebirth they're going to have, whether they're going for liberation, whether they're bodhisattvas, or whether they just want a better life, or they're looking for God, or they want to go to heaven. I mean, he knows everything. He knows the paths leading to the various rebirths, the virtuous polluted karma that brings precious human life. He knows all the paths that lead to the 3 vehicles, all the ways that we go incorrect paths that lead us in continuing to just cycle in samsara. And Venerable says that's why they teach so much in the scriptures about the good qualities and how to produce good results. And the whole effect is that you don't experience results of causes that you haven't created. To just continually see that in the scriptures on what kind of karma ripens. It's virtue brings happiness. Non-virtue brings suffering. To just remember the good qualities produce good results. And what do we need to practice? What do we need to abandon? What do we need to cultivate? Once again, it keeps coming back around over and over again. And then, she talks a little bit about, how we got here in this election year with all going on. Karma's not linear. It's not all non-virtue ripening and all virtue ripening kind of on linear. It's a grab bag of all sorts of karma ripening. I mean, here we are born in the wealthiest country on the planet, struggling around its ethical compass and what it wants, how it wants to represent itself in the world. And we're maybe part of the conversation, but we're certainly part of the experience of experiencing it. So what Venerable, the reason why she keeps asking us to imagine is that she says it helps us to pull us out of our concrete ideas of what humans can be and what they can think. Imagine other sentient beings are more important than me. We can see how useful the qualities that the Buddha has would be if our motivation was to be of the greatest benefit to living beings. To remember constantly that all these powers he has is driven by great compassion, driven by bodhicitta, driven by understanding the nature of reality. And what would it be like to have that kind of ease, have that kind of clarity? And it would get us out of our limited way in which we think, how vast can we think? What can we really develop into? I mean, it really does kind of want to blow the doors off of our limited way of thinking. And 2 of the examples that they gave in the Majjhima Nikaya on 2 where the Buddha foresaw destinies and how he participated in that. First of them was Angulimala. By the time he met the Buddha, he was at his 999th finger, right? The Buddha stepped in so he wouldn't kill his mother. And the Buddha, foreseeing his destiny surely to be in the lower realms, like simultaneously prevented him from committing that last crime and was able to win him over, able to teach him and put him right into the order, like the swiftest way possible, it's said in the treatise. And subsequently, Angulimala showed himself to be an exemplary monk. Now, the Buddha saw where he was going, and luckily for Angulimala, he happened to have the Buddha's great compassion coinciding with his crazy thinking, and he had enough karma, to realize that he was heading for the hell realms for a long, long time. And the Buddha stepped in, and Angulimala had the karma enough to hear what the Buddha had to say. That's the part that's so remarkable, and that the Buddha's skillful means on knowing the timing of that really was the best thing that could have possibly happened to another sentient being. The other one that is a story that's told where the Buddha got to see and really, figure out somebody's karma is that dear weeping Kudapantaka, who was the one who couldn't get 2 words straight. He couldn't memorize anything to save his life. Him and his brother went into the monastery at the same time. His brother was just so embarrassed by his brother. He couldn't put mantras together. He couldn't think of simplest teachings, and they were just so fed up with him. So he went to the Buddha and just crying, and he said, I am neither a monk nor a layman. I am a great idiot. I am a great fool. And the Buddha said, there is no fool but the one who thinks he is smart. And he gave him those 2 lines, I removed the dust, I removed the dirt, and sent them in this story to clean the monk's shoes. I don't know whether shoes or the patio or whatever. While he was busy with his simple task, he discovered the mystery. To remove the dust is to suppress desire, hatred, and ignorance. At once all of his passions were cut through and he attained arhatship. So the Buddha saw that he was ripe, prime, gave him exactly what he needed, and the rest is arhatship. So these stories, once again, true or not true, they're beautiful examples of the Buddha's great compassion and his skillful means to knowing the karma of sentient beings, what he does when he knows that, So whether he shows up in our life in some form of emanation or another to help us and prevent us, we don't know. But it's nice to conjure up and imagine situations in our life where the timing is impeccable. There's some major shift or something that happens in our minds, something that happens in our life, something that's more than just a coincidence. Who knows where he is? I mean, limitless emanations going on simultaneously for limitless beings. Who knows? I love the thought. All right, number 4. The Tathagata understands as it actually is the world with its many different elements. This is basically the Buddha can see a book. He takes a book. He can take it apart, the earth, the water, the air, the pages, the heat. He sees the many causes, conditions, the dependent arising of the things that compose it. Venerable says, if you can do this, do you think it would increase your attachment or decrease it? If you could see the elements and the particles of every piece of food you ate, or every beautiful scene you saw, or your clothes, or your brand new shoes, or your best friend, if you could see the way the Buddha sees things, because we impute so much value on everything from gems to people, if we could see the elements that compose them, the composition of disintegrating, the value that we impute on objects, would it help us decrease our attachment or increase it? I think probably a pretty good chance we'd lose interest in it pretty quickly, or at least look at it a little bit more realistically. The Buddha sees objects in this way with no attachment. How many possible ways to see things and interact with them, and how we get so tangled up in our conceptions just as we see things. Do we like the object? Is it beautiful? Is it attractive? Is it not? I mean, he understands that things don't exist the way that they appear. And in such a different way on what would it be like if we saw objects the way that he did. So that was basically the general gist that Venerable went to on number 4, is would it help us with our attachment if we could see the elemental nature, the dependent arising nature of objects. Number 5, the Tathagata understands as it actually is how beings have different inclinations. Sentient beings have so many. They were called inferior, which is worldly things for just the happiness of this life, and superior inclinations that head us in a virtuous direction. He knows what sentient beings want to achieve and what they're attracted to. There are diverse tendencies. The Buddha spoke to farmers, outcasts, merchants, nobility, making the Dharma relevant to each person according to his or her way of thinking. So he did it to individuals and he did it with groups of people. To be able to do this, imagine, once again, just imagine, with world leaders, politicians, terrorists, greedy people who only think of themselves. If we had the skill to understand the different inclinations of beings, how would we be able to engage people who needed our support? So here Venerable gives there's 2 examples of the different inclinations. And one of the most famous ones is Kisa Gotami and her dead child, right? Here's this woman who lost her child, and she's just carrying this corpse around, grieving unconsolably. The Buddha doesn't say, get over it already. Instead, he says he'll bring her child back to life, but she would have to receive some sesame seeds from a home that had not lost anybody to death. Okay, so full of hope, she goes out there into the village, and one by one, she can find no family that has not lost a loved one. So she comes back basically empty-handed. And in the process, she realized that death happens to everybody. I am no exception. So the Buddha, in his beautiful skill to know how to help him because he knew her way of thinking, her loved ones may have just given up on her because the grief was so unconsolable. I mean, a lonely experience. And here's the Buddha just holding her and giving her exactly what she needed. The second example they talk about is the Kalamas. These are people that lived during the time of the Buddha. He went and taught them on occasion. And he came into their city and they said, this master just came into this town a few months ago and he said his teachings were supreme. Then 2 weeks later, another teacher comes into our town and says his teachings are the supreme teachings. Then there's another one that says my teachings are supreme. So he says they're so confused because they're told something different every time, that everybody's teachings are supreme. So the Buddha didn't say, you fools, believe in my teachings. He didn't go there. He did not say that. You can see the temptation, but not the mind of the Buddha. He said, look at your own experience. Look at the teachings. Have they worked for you? Are they reasonable? Are they logical? If you practice them, have they helped you? Go through each one of those masters, teachers' teachings and put it through the test, just like rubbing the gold, right? Now, Venerable makes a little bit of a kind of a little caveat here. She says, now, someone else, the Buddha might say, don't trust your experience because their minds are cluttered with a lot of preconceptions. So they won't see things logically and with reason. If it feels right, go with it. And that could be anything. That could be a lot of wrong views and a lot of misconceptions. And then there's this whole experience of, our teachers. I mean, they're so skillful, but sometimes, well, maybe that's on the next one. Oh, that's on the next one. That's on the next one, sorry. But what she does say is that many times we have these discussions with people, and the other person is not tracking what we're saying, or vice versa. They're giving us some instructions, they're giving their point of view, and we're like, and you just can't follow them, and you give up after a while. Or you say, this person's just not getting there, a little bit on the slow side. Our overlays keep us from seeing things as they are. Somebody looks a certain way, somebody comes from a certain group, somebody comes from a socioeconomic background. We get all of this overlay, and then we put it on the top of people, and they get into this small little space where we can't see them for who they are. But to have the level of understanding that we would know how to work with each and every living being minus any overlay. We meet them exactly where they are, who they are, what their capacity is, what their inclinations are, so that we could teach them and that they could understand. Once again, imagine what this would be like, even the simple exchanges in town, even in heated discussions, to be able to know what it is that people are trying to say, and to be able to respond in a way that they understand. Number 6, the Tathagata understands as it actually is the disposition of the faculties of other beings. So the faculties, they're called the 5 faculties: faith, effort, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. So they're different than the sense faculties. So here the Buddha actually understands the dispositions of these faculties, these levels of faith, these levels of effort, these levels of mindfulness, these levels of concentration and wisdom. And he leads sentient beings. So if you have a lot of faith and you're more devotional, that's the way he would have you accomplish the path. If you don't have much effort or faith, or you're a little bit skeptical, or you have some doubts, he would do another way of doing this. So sentient beings have so many different ways of understanding things, and so the Buddha has the skill to be able to give each and every one of them the instruction they need. So she gives this example, and we have the example here as well. Geshe Tegchok, this is the one that she talks about every once in a while, that a student would come to him and ask for advice. A number, maybe 2 or 3 students. And sometimes they wohe be asking Geshe-la the same question. And depending on who it was, he would give them a different answer. But what would happen is they'd get together and they would share what he said, and they'd end up being so confused because he would tell one person one thing, another person another thing, and another person a third thing. Why did he tell you to do that? So maybe, Geshe-la saw one of them that there was laziness, so this is the right way to do this. Maybe somebody was an overachiever, same question, maybe they got to do it this way. This happens here, right? Venerable trains us each one differently. And in the early years, I get to tell you, this was a serious bone of contention because she was sort of navigating how to train us separately. And when some of the newer folks, after us, the 4 of us old timers were here for a few years, these new ones would come in and she was doing things, letting them get away with stuff that she never let us get away with. I'd be like, what is going on? There was so much of this grumbling and grousing about why is she letting them do that? Why don't they get to do that? And it was all her cultivating the skillful means. And she does it with us now. You compare notes, ask questions of her, same question, and she'll give 3 of us 3 different answers, depending on where we are in our practice, how we can hear the feedback, what do we need, what's our disposition, what's our inclination. Our teachers are cultivating the skillful means to be able to have this power, which is to understand the disposition of where people are in their faith, their effort, their mindfulness, their wisdom. And so that is really, and Venerable, but what she would go to Lama Zopa Rinpoche and complain to him, he'd say, and then, right? He never, sometimes Rinpoche was so gentle. Lama Yesh had been reading Big Love. Some of the students, he was so gentle with, and some of them, he had the sword out with them all the time. With Venerable, she got, and then, or he'd say, well, the Buddha, people complained about the Buddha too, so go do what I've asked you to do. She didn't get the warm stroke. She got a lot of the sword, Of course, as a result, she's a fabulous teacher, but he was not as compassionate and gentle with her as he was with other people. Once again, skillful means, learning the dispositions, the ability for her to take on that level of direct feedback, and how much she learned from those exchanges with him. Okay, number 7, the Tathagata understands as it actually is the defilements, cleansing, and emergence in regard to the meditative stabilizations, liberations, concentrations, and meditative absorptions. This is in terms of the Buddha really being able to understand where people are when practitioners get up to these different levels of meditative absorption, how they progress at different levels, on what path, what's blocking each of the people, what's the obstacles. There's always this thing about some folks who get into these deep states of meditative absorption, they think that they've attained liberation or some sort of blissful state that's awakening, that they're so confused and they don't want to leave these states. So this is one of the places where, the Buddha's got to be a little bit, clear about, no, this is not where you want to hang out. There are ones he knows how to cleanse, to teach them how to cleanse or remove obstacles. There are all different kinds of liberation states of meditative absorptions, 9 serial absorptions, the 20 sanghas. These are going to be explained farther down in the chapters on concentration. But the Buddha has an ability to actually lead those in these progressively deeper meditative absorptions where they run into problems, how to cleanse and how to emerge. And they do these really amazing things after a while, and how they're able to just move in and out of these different states like just on a snap of a finger. A snap of a finger, ring of a bell. Okay, let's see. For 8, the Tathagata recollects his manifold past lives, all these different births, eons of world contractions, eons of world expansions, hundreds of thousands of births. There I was named. He knows his clan. He knows his appearance. He knows the food that he ate, his experiences of pleasure and pain. His lifespan is passing away. Then he was reborn, appeared elsewhere, and there too I was named into such a clan and appearance. Thus, with their aspects and particulars, he recollects his manifold past lives. I mean, just to be able to know the details of every one of our past lives. Maybe scary for us? Or would it help us to stay focused if we had that kind of awareness and commitment to getting off this merry-go-round? So it all depends on would our minds be strong enough to be able to see these lives that we have lived, or would it be such a impetus, such an incredible, powerful awareness that it would just throw us right into developing renunciation and just making the determination to be free? And that's the question. Every time we experience, keep us focused on what matters in the Dharma. Every time we experience any type of suffering, we can see all the cause and conditions that brought it about. Every time we experienced incredible joy, we would understand the virtue that we created. Learning, mind take note. Would it add some intensity or purpose or determination to purify, create virtue, or would we be too horrified? So again, that might be different strokes for different folks, hard to say. Number 9, with the divine eye, which is purified and surpasses the human, the Tathagata sees beings passing away and reappearing, inferior, superior, fair and ugly, fortunate and unfortunate. He understands how beings pass on according to their actions. These worthy beings who were ill-conducted in body, speech, and mind, revilers of Aryas, wrong in their views, giving effect to wrong views and their actions on the dissolution of the body after death, have reappeared in a state of deprivation, in a bad destination, in perdition, even in hell. But those worthy beings who are well-conducted in body, speech, and mind, not revilers of Aryas, right in their views, giving effect to right views in their actions, on the dissolution of the body after death, have reappeared in good destinations, even in the heavenly world. So here, Venerable, this is really remarkable. So this one is different in that the Buddha is being able to see the past lives of others. He not only sees his own, but he also sees the past lives of every living being. So she says that we at the Abbey, we pray for all of our dedications. We haven't seen them when they die. We don't know what state of mind that they were in when they died. Were they able to practice? Were they overwhelmed by their self-grasping? Were they overwhelmed by their afflictions? We didn't see where they were born, where they went. We can wish them well. We certainly put our prayers in that direction. But the Buddha knows all of this. And that enables him to explain the teachings in a way that really fit with that person's history and way of approach and thinking. Think again of all the beings passing away and reemerging. Being able to see, and Venerable says, what would that be if to be able to see the birth, aging, sickness, and death of every living being? She said, would that be a powerful impetus to generate bodhicitta and compassion? Would we be able to hold that in our minds, seeing the plight of sentient beings going round and round samsara without end? Because we see our own suffering, we see our own birth, aging, sickness, and death cycling over and over again, and we don't want anybody else to have to suffer in the same way that we understand our own suffering. So this is, once again, to generate compassion. If we can stand looking at the past lives and the rebirths of others. And then last but not least, by realizing for himself with direct knowledge, the Tathagata here and now enters upon and abides in the liberation of mind and the liberation by wisdom that are unpolluted with the destruction of the pollutants. This power that he has, that while Shravakas and solitary realizer arhats have eliminated only the afflictive obscurations, the Tathagata has eliminated all of them. Summoned with the super knowledges can know the spiritual level of only those who are of the same or inferior level. So the clairvoyance, the divine eye, being able to see other people's spiritual levels, but the Buddha can see the levels of realization and attainments of each and every living being. He isn't fooled by our efforts to impress him, to know our strengths and weaknesses, who has attained the awakening in which of the 3 vehicles, and he guides them accordingly. So here we talk about the liberation of mind, we're talking about the different kinds of concentrations and the development of samadhi. And when it says here about the liberation by wisdom, that is from the realization of emptiness. And the pollutants, that are the destruction of the pollutants, there are 3, sometimes 4 of them. The first of the pollutants is free from sensuality or sense desire, particularly the ones that we struggle with in the desire realm. The second pollutant is another kind of desire for existence, the mind that at the time of death wants to be reborn because it is afraid of becoming non-existent. So that's a form of desire. This manifests at the time of death when we're separating from the body and we're just grasping because we are losing that which we know so well. And then which sometimes it is also interpreted as a desire for existence in the form and formless realms because they've generated these levels of concentration that bring so much bliss, from which they end up creating the karma to, they create the karma to be reborn in these realms, but then they get really attached to the bliss. And when that karma runs out, then there's this struggle for existence to stay in that particular realm where they have all of this blissful experience. And then the third pollutant is the ignorance, the root of samsara. So that is it. Any questions or comments about the powers or the fearlessnesses? Anything come up as I was racing through these? Yeah, Venerable Jigme.
I was just thinking that to have these powers, the mind would have to be so vast. If I had even one of these, blow my brain up, So that helps me see that each time we have a difficulty, something that we're struggling with, that we don't back away and don't drop it, but we keep going, not in a tight way, but and that builds our capacity to hold more and more and more and more. And that's what Venerable Chodron is all about. Everything that she does that is to that end, it seems like.
This cultivation of a vast kind of thinking that doesn't surrender to the limitations of the mind as it currently is. Yeah. Any other thoughts or comments? Are you inspired, intimidated, bored, puzzled? This is who we take refuge in, folks. He watches our, whatever form they manifest, they're always watching our backs. You have a Wilson?
Also, when I think about the qualities of a Buddha, when we're cultivating bodhicitta, we come up to the great resolve and realize, what am I getting into? It's like seeing people in a desert and promising I'm going to make it rain. How am I going to help all these people and all these beings? And seeing these powers, this is why we aspire to Buddhahood, because this is how we're going to be able to lead sentient beings.
And there won't be any question about whether we can do it or not. I mean, it's unceasing, spontaneous, simultaneous, unpolluted, perfect. Yeah, Venerable Kunka.
At the beginning of the class, you read a quote about how sentient beings' karma is almost as powerful as the Buddha's
activities, enlightened activities, yeah.
I've remember hearing in the past that they're kind of equal, but the Buddha is.
This is Geshe Zopa's. He says, in some sense, it looks like an individual's karma has the same power as a Buddha's activities. He was making a comparison. Yeah. Well, I've heard it equal. I haven't heard it stronger, which is why we've got to meet them. As Venerable Pema said this morning, we've got to meet them. I mean, they're giving 100%. And one of the things that I do want to say is that 100% on any given day is going to be different. The Buddha gives 100, 150%, the entire mode of his existence. Some mornings, my 100% is that I'm not yelling at everybody all day. My 100% is keeping my mouth closed and just keeping some space. Other days, my mind is so clear, and the joy of being here and being with people and developing my practice is my 100%. You know, so there's no perfection in what 100% looks to us. It's what we're doing in the moment, and it's the best we can do. And that's why I think the Buddha never gives up on us, because he sees there's not any time in our existence when we're not doing the best we can. And when we get into troubles, when we start judging what's good enough and what's not good enough. So 100% could be, this is it, this is what I got. And there's no judgment on his side. But we've got a lot of karma to realize that our karma is as strong as his enlightening activity is a mind-blowing thought, which is why it's so important to accumulate merit, to purify, and to realize the nature of reality, to start working on getting the seeds, the imprints, the root of this. You know, getting some control over that, because they're driving the car right now, you know, and he can do everything he's doing. But we're the ones in the driver's seat. We want to be in the driver's seat, not the karma in the driver's seat. So, all righty, folks. Let's dedicate all of our merit for the long-term aspiration of being able to develop these beautiful powers and fearlessnesses solely for the purpose of being able to benefit each of these kind mothers who has really helped us to get where we are. And we'll continue to do so until our awakening. They're not going to leave us. They're not out of our lives. And that's why we owe them everything.
May we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May the born have no decline, but increase forevermore. May the spiritual snowy mountain pure land, you're the source of good and happiness, powerful Tenzing Gyatso Chenrezi, may you stay until samsara ends. May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Love Sang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Fearless Supreme Spiritual Leader, Omniscient King of the Shakyas, Motherly Tara, Supreme Bestower of longevity and wisdom, vast ocean assembly of sources of refuge, grant propitiousness here and now for a nectar of benefit and bliss to flow. With a clear mind and extensive learning gained from following the wondrous traditions of Thubten, the able one's teachings, you bring clarity to masses of disciples with the light of Chodron, the lamp of the Dharma. May your lotus feet remain unfaltering for a very long time. Through your dharmic deeds of hearing, thinking, meditating, and so on, place those who seek the liberated path in harmony through immaculate discipline. Please lead all beings to liberation with undeclining excellent qualities of scripture and insight, and establish them in a glory of eternal bliss. May the deeds of explaining and practicing the Dharma, done by groups supporting the teachings and their upholders, who spread the view of dependent arising and non-violent actions in the 10 directions, and especially at Sravasti Abbey in the west.